We would like to welcome you to the Bear Creek Watershed Plan Environmental Assessment meeting. This meeting is to discuss our alternatives for the Bear Creek Watershed. First, we would like to give the floor to Supervisor Banks so that he can greet you all, and then we will get into the presentation.
Okay. Well, greetings from District 4 Supervisor Carl Banks and from the Watershed Committee. We've been working on this for a while, and we're trying our best to see what we can do to alleviate flooding in Canton as a whole. I think at this point, we've narrowed some options down. We're getting down to where we feel like we know what we can do, and we just wanted some input from the community on some of the things we feel would be necessary to solve some of those issues. So in saying that, I would really like to just turn things over back to our engineering group and the people that know what this is all about. I'm just a supervisor. I'm trying to help, that's all. So anyway, we're gonna let our engineering group start giving you some information, those that are here, those that, and just take something home to those that didn't go. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Supervisor Banks. So tonight we are here to discuss the alternatives for the Bear Creek Watershed. I think all of you all received a fact sheet when you first came in. On the front is the background of the watershed. On the back are the list of alternatives that Bill McDonald will be going through in the slides. What we're asking you to do is go through these alternatives. As he explains them, you also received a comment form. If you could complete the comment form and return it to us by the end of the night, we'd appreciate it. What we're asking on the comment form is for you to tell us which alternative you like, and for whatever reason that you like that alternative. It could be helping your neighborhood specifically, it could be cost, it could be location, but we would like to have those by the end of the meeting. Okay, so the purpose of this meeting is to receive public input on alternatives for flood damage reduction in the Canton area of the Bear Creek watershed. And we would like to introduce some of our key players. The project is being funded by the Natural Resource Conservation Service, known as NRCS, ran by Kurt Reedus, and the state conservation engineer is Mr. Obi Lewis. The sponsor, of course, is Madison County Board of Supervisors, and the NRCS is partnering with Mississippi Soil and Water Conservation Commission, and the executive director, Nick Ivey, is here with us tonight also. And AJA and Wagner Engineering are partnering as the technical contractors for this project. The purpose of this watershed plan was to reduce the damages from flooding in the high-risk areas of City of Canton. What we decided to do was to reduce the amount of flood water and reduce the depth of flood water in the Canton area. And the watershed ranges, well, it starts, the headwaters start in North Madison, near Annandale and Reunion Parkway. It flows north through Canton, and it exits and enters into the Big Black River in the northwest part of the watershed. And now we will get into the alternatives.
Thank you, Colette. Calandra said, the purpose of this meeting is to share information on alternative solutions that address the purpose. She mentioned the purpose of the plan, again, is to reduce damages from flooding. And so the solutions that we come up with, the potential alternatives, have to address that particular purpose. This is a program that is part of a federal program, federally funded, and so the programmatic requirements require that we identify the specific purpose. There are many potential purposes that we could address, but when we identify that purpose as flood damage reduction, then that means that the alternatives primarily have to address that purpose. They can have other benefits, but primarily we have to focus on flood damage reduction. So as part of this process, part of the regulatory framework in which we evaluate this program is the National Environmental Policy Act. We call it NEPA. And that has sort of a standard approach to formulating and then evaluating alternative solutions. The first thing we have to do is establish what we call the no action condition, and that sounds rather straightforward. You know, you do nothing, we know what's going to happen. But we assume that we do nothing, and then we project into the future over the life of a proposed project period, say 50 years, and then we project what conditions would be like if we were to do nothing. Flood damages would continue, they would increase. The intensity and frequency of weather events has been increasing. That potentially could increase. So flood damages will only get worse. Development tends to increase over time, so that means more properties would become at risk. So we have to establish that, and then we try to put a dollar figure on what that future condition, what those damages would be. And then that becomes the baseline on which we measure any of our action alternatives. So that's the no action. That's why you'll see that terminology. And that's what that means. Well, what we're focused on really tonight is the action alternatives. What options do we have to take action to address flooding? Another way to think about this is what options are there for federal investment. Remember, this is a federally funded project, and so whatever options we consider have to be developed within the guidelines of that federal funding. So there are really three overarching strategies for our actions. We can slow the water down before it gets to Canton, before it gets to the risk areas. We can either minimize it or slow it down. We can go to the areas of impact and get the water out faster. And there are ways to do that. And then the third thing we can do, if we can't slow the water down enough, or if we can't get it out fast enough, then we go to the areas of potential risk and remove the risk. And so the alternatives you'll see here in just a few minutes, and that you see around the room, they address one of these three strategies. You'll see that. So what I want to do now is just walk you through 6 or 7 of the preliminary alternatives that kind of made it to this final stage. As Calandra mentioned, and as Supervisor Banks mentioned earlier, we've been at this for quite a while now, and we're reaching the final stage where we take this collection of potential alternatives and evaluate it against some very detailed criteria, and then come up with what's called the preferred or the most reasonable alternative. And that's the one that achieves the most benefits with the least impact. And the impacts can be costs, they can be human and social impacts, they can be environmental impacts, all of these things. So we look at all of that. So that's where we are. So you're going to see 6 or 7 alternatives. And what you see on these boards around the room, I'll show you those on the screen and explain what you're looking at. And then after this brief time, you can get up and look at those boards. But in order to get to these 6 or 7 final alternatives, we've been through 24 at least. We've looked at all kinds of options, various iterations of these options. So, the first is that I'll put up here on the screen. And if you have your handout, you should have got the handout on the table. On the back of that fact sheet, there's a table. It's rather detailed, but it's detailed for a purpose. We want to give you sufficient detail to be able to look at some of the factors that we have evaluated and sort of be your own judge and understand how we got to where we are. So they're ordered 1 through 7, and they follow the order that you'll see here. So the first one we looked at is flood water or flood storage detention throughout the Bear Creek watershed. This you'll see this whole Bear Creek watershed. And so these little, what we call them dry dams, and that's basically where we construct an earthen berm or an embankment that's designed in a peak storm event to hold water. When the creek begins to rise, it holds back water until the creek begins to fall again, and then it releases, so that we can hopefully dampen the effect of those critical storm events. And we call that, you call that a dry dam, or you may hear the word detention or stormwater detention or flood storage. That's what that means. And so one alternative we looked at is we went throughout the watershed and we found tributaries on which we could build these dry dams. And we looked at the collective effect. There's 8 of these spread throughout. We looked at the collective effect of that. They're small, relatively small, you know, mostly between 1 and 200 acres, but some very small, some approaching 3. Again, the idea is to reduce peak flows, and they also give the added benefit of providing sediment control. They continue to control and reduce sediment due to runoff from some of the pasture lands or some of the ag lands. The thing about this, though, when we take a detailed look at this, the collective benefit is not significant in the critical impact areas. Remember, the critical areas we're looking at are in the city of Canton. And so, even though we get some benefit from this type of solution, we don't get enough significant benefits. We don't lower the flood levels enough in those critical impact areas to really reduce damages significantly. The second thing we looked at is along Bachelor Creek. Now, Bachelor Creek is one of those critical impact areas. And in the city of Canton, we've got two really major sources. Of course, this is all about the Bear Creek watershed, so you hear Bear Creek all the time. Bear Creek is a major source of flooding in Canton, but there's also Bachelor Creek on the north side of town. Some have heard it called Creosote Creek. But it's Bachelor Creek's the USGS name for it. But there's some critical areas of impact that get chronic flooding. Everybody here knows that. We don't have to tell you that. So that's a critical area of impact. So we looked at what we could do. We looked at a dozen things that we could do along Bachelor Creek to try to mitigate that flooding. So one of them that made it to this final stage was putting some type of flood wall or flood levees along both sides of Bachelor Creek through town, roughly from the railroad out past, out into the open area where it opens up into the grasslands just north of the city limits. It looked like something like this. The flood wall in your tighter areas are places where, just for space considerations, you can't get an earthen berm in there. So you would do something like this: have a flood wall, maybe a sheet pile, either vinyl or steel. Other places where it's more open and would allow it, we would put an earthen berm. And both of these are what we would call low profile. That would, they're somewhere around 5 feet. So, an average height person can see over the top of it. So it's not like a massive, 20-foot wall or something. But this type of solution can get some pretty effective flood reduction in those critical areas along Bachelor Creek. Downside is it only impacts Bachelor. It doesn't do anything for Bear Creek. So what we're finding is we're gonna have to do something in combination that will help Baxter as well as Bear, and we'll get to that. But you can see we have a substantial number of homes that could be removed from the risk area. There'd be land acquisition required, as with most of these. So just relatively speaking, that's what that solution would look like. You'll see this one again. We looked at also coming along Baxter Creek and just widening it. We looked at this on Baxter, we looked at it on Bear, we looked at it on Hot Water Ditch, taking all the main tributaries and just taking the old conventional approach that was very common 50 years ago. You just go in there and widen the bottom of it, flatten the slopes, and clear it out. And that's not a popular alternative so much these days, particularly with our environmental sensitivities. But still, we looked at it because everybody said, well, why don't we just go in there and widen the ditch? So we looked at it to demonstrate what the relative impact would be. And just on Baxter Creek, to control that 100-year flood, the 100-year flood event, which is the design flood that we have to look at, we would have to widen Baxter. If you can think about Baxter Creek right now, or Creosote Creek, the actual bottom of that ditch, or that creek, is probably, 10 feet, between 10 and 15 feet wide. Of course, it rises to the banks, it's much wider. In the actual bottom, to get the effect that we need, we would have to take that bottom and widen it to 50 feet or more. And you think about the significant impact that would have on that neighborhood and on those neighborhoods along Baxter Creek. That would have substantial impact, substantial land acquisition, relatively high cost of implementation. So we looked at it, but the impacts, the costs are just much more severe than other things, and particularly compared to that flood wall option. So that's back to things we looked at Baxter. Then we looked at other things. We looked at some of that flood detention that we looked at throughout the watershed. We could take one or more of those in places and combine them with some of these, like take some detention in the upper part of Baxter Creek and combine it with this or with that flood wall and get even better results. I'll show you that too. So what about South Canton? Let's talk about Bear Creek, the reason we're here. Here's a bigger bear comes down in here. And everybody knows that right here south of Canton, you got Bear Creek, Little Bear, and Walnut, and they all converge right there. So what can you do to keep flooding out of the south part of Canton? One thing we looked at was a levee, flood protection levee around the south part of town. It would basically tie into the high ground just below Peace Street. It would run down and then wrap around the south part of town and tie into the high ground out east. That line, the green line represents the ridge line between these two watersheds. So it would from high ground to high ground. So what would that? Here's a better depiction of that. This is blown up much more than that last one. You see here's this is Jewel Williams Boulevard. There's Dinkins, West Dinkins. That's Peace Street right there. There's the railroad 51. See all these yellow dots. Those represent homes that are in the 100-year floodplain. This is what's depicted here in blue is the FEMA, the flood insurance rate map. The FEMA flood 100-year floodplain with a special flood hazard area. All those are homes and built in commercial buildings, in churches and community buildings that are impacted by that floodplain. So if we took this flood control levee and basically tied it into the high ground here, came south and then turned east and tied it into the high ground right there, we would protect all of those structures. We could take all those structures out of the floodplain, out of the risk area. Potential for lowering flooding, if not eliminating, FEMA is not so hesitant to eliminate flood insurance, but they can reduce the cost of it. So if we could take these properties out of the hazard area, we could reduce flood insurance premiums. You could hopefully, over time, increase property values. Just some of the benefits of that. It's costly, but it's not as costly as some of these other larger scale alternatives. We're basically talking about an earthen levee again. It's a low profile, you know, that what you're looking at here is 5 or 6 feet high, but it's something that looks very much like that. We could reduce flood depths in this lower corner here up to 6 feet by doing something like that. Take 60 plus homes out of the flood risk, in addition to some of these other buildings and structures. So that's an attractive alternative. What else can we do in South Canton? Well, from the very beginning, there's been talk about some type of water feature, lakes. We looked at the dry dam option. Well, there's also, you can look at options for permanent water storage. What this represents is a flood control lake south of Canton. And that's a very big footprint. The actual, if you were to put a dam across that floodplain, with the goal of retaining water on a permanent basis, some kind of permanent pool, it wouldn't be near that large. And what you're looking at there, that's almost 4,000 acres. A permanent pool lake would only be about 750 acres. But you'd have to reserve depth and flood easements around the perimeter for flood storage. Because the whole point is flood storage. So that in a flood event, that the pool would rise and you would the footprint would get much larger. So you can imagine. So we're looking at between 750 and 3,600 acres of flood storage. If you put something like that, you can reduce flooding. In South Canton, in that area we just looked at, along Beacon Street, along P Street, going P Street, the interstate, that kind of southwest part of town. You could reduce flood depths 2 or 3 feet. The impacts, well, there's one more, there's lots of benefits. Another benefit is it would provide recreational opportunities. A permanent pool, a water feature provides all kinds of recreational opportunities. Potential for economic development opportunities. On the impact side, there's a substantial amount of land required. Just to build the dam and you have to require outright the property for the permanent pool area. But then for the flood pool, at the minimum, you'd have to require flood easements so that you preserve development or prevent development in those easements in the event of flooding. So the land acquisition will be substantial. You have significant impacts to local roads. There are several roads north, Old Canton, Solwell, a couple of others that cross, in this area, and they would be impacted. In a flood event, they would be inundated by several feet, so we'd have to find ways to mitigate that. You either relocate or raise the road, so you can imagine the cost of doing that. The utility impacts, significant impacts with floodplain habitat, would be changing the habitat. We could provide water, aquatic habitat, but we would be converting what's currently now woodland and wooded wetland habitats, which are different than permanent water habitats. And then just the first cost, the installation cost of that would be enormous compared to some of these other things. But we looked at it because it's been mentioned several times, and people want to know, well, what if we built them? What if we built a flood storage feature? So that's what that would look like. And then there's combinations. There's more than likely, we said all along that whatever solution we come up with is going to be a combination of things, because no one thing will solve everything in South Canton and Baxter Creek at the same time. So it's going to take a combination of actions. So we took what looked like the most promising alternative along Baxter, which is some type of flood protection structure, combined with possibly some type of dry dam feature to detain floodwaters, along with the most promising option for South Canton, which looks like it would be this flood control levee. And then we put them all together and looked at that, ran that hydraulically through our hydraulic models, and looked at that. And as far as bang for the buck, the most benefits at the least cost, or the most efficient cost, is a combination of something like this. Now that's cost. It used to be in the old days, you just got the, whatever cost the lease was what you built. There are all kinds of other factors now that we consider: social factors, cultural factors, environmental factors, as well as cost and economic factors. And there's more than just the construction costs, all kinds of cost factors. So we looked at all that, and it looks like at this point that this type of a combination of alternatives would have the greatest impact at the most efficient or cost-effective impact. But we also have to look at non-structural. We're required to look at non-structural alternatives. So what does that mean? That means, all these other things we looked at, we're building something, we're going out there and building a flood levee or a dam or some combination of things, flood wall. Non-structural alternative is are there reasonable alternatives to solve our problem that don't involve building something and impacting all the impact that would have on the natural and human environment. But we have to look at that. And really the only reasonable non-structural thing that we could do in Bear Creek would be some type of voluntary floodplain buyout, or at least modification. Some combination of flood proofing going into the critical areas and flood proofing at-risk properties, or else removing those properties. It depends on the relative damages. So we look at flooding impacts, look at actual depth of flood water. We're talking about a foot or more of flood water on a property. There might be ways we can flood proof that property to mitigate that. But we start getting at 2 or more feet, 3 feet particularly, then damage is going to be too significant. And really the only option is to probably acquire that property, remove it, and return that property to the floodplain. So that's what a voluntary floodplain buyout would look like. It's voluntary. It's focused on the most high areas of most high risk, and these are the areas that are most at risk. Where, remember the map with all those colored dots where the structures are in the floodplain. That's where these structures are kind of clustered around the city. So we looked at those areas. It would be, it would involve purchasing properties, removing those properties. If those are rental properties, then it would involve purchasing the property and then compensating the renter, providing rental relocation expense. There are all kinds of ways you can do this, all kinds of models for doing this. But there are 150 or more homes that would be included in these at-risk areas. Properties would be converted, once cleared, converted back to floodplain easements, riparian corridors, just stream-side corridors, green spaces. You could do public things with it, but they would be preserved forever in some type of a covenant or an easement. The problem with that, the overall benefit, it's uncertain. It's hard to quantify the benefit of something like that because the participation is uncertain. It's voluntary. And so we don't know how many people would participate in something like that. So, but we have to look at it. And so that's what that is. And so you'll see that on these couple places in the back as the non-structural alternative. So that's the process we went to. Those are the alternatives, both the structural actions and the non-structural that have sort of made it to the final evaluation. The sheet that we gave you, that table, it's got some, with the most effective, that's most cost effective, kind of presents itself as that combination of alternatives. But it's not our place here to recommend or propose any action. We're here to present this information and get public feedback. The process itself will resolve itself, if you know what I mean. The solution will come to the fore if we follow the process. It will identify itself as the most cost-effective or the least impactful. And there's still some more detailed impact analyses that we've got to do. Look at some specific, habitat, wetlands, wildlife, cultural resources. Look at some of those things in more detail with some of these specific options. But the main thing is we want to present this to you and ask you to give us your feedback. We really need that. That's the best thing you can do for us, is to give us your feedback on these options. There we go. We'll talk about battery today. As far as next steps, we're here. We're nearing the end of this stage, the planning environmental assessment stage. Our goal is to have this process wrapped up in draft form and off to headquarters, NRCS, National Water Management Center in September. They've indicated, just generally speaking, that, and Olga, please correct me if you need to, but the latest information we have is the last quarter, fourth quarter, will be their review, and then feedback responding to their review. First quarter of the year, we'll respond back, and Olga and his state office staff have a key role in that. So working with them, working with National Water Management Center, we'll respond to NRCS comments on the plan, and then by the second quarter, the final draft document will be out. The entire draft will be out for public review, more of a formal review, and then we'll be hoping for a record of decision or a finding of no significant impact in that second quarter. Once that happens, and there is an approved project, it goes into design, and then as soon as design is finished, into construction. So those are rough timelines for those activities. We're always looking for ways we can trim that schedule, but that's the next steps that we expect. But the most immediate next step, once again, what we need is for you to give us your feedback. There are 3 ways to do it. Calandra went through the form with you. If you can fill out that comment form and leave it with us, we'd love to have that. If you want to take it with you and fill it out and then email it to us, lay it on your countertop, take a picture and email it to us, or scan it in your office scanner. Here's the email that's on the handout material. Or, if you're going to go old school, hold it up, put a stamp on it, and mail it to us. But if you could do that within the next couple of weeks, that would help. We're really trying to get these comments as soon as possible so we can wrap them back into the process and get the process finished. Yes, ma'am.
I just have one question about alternative 5 when you were talking about the flood control lake on Bear Creek, and you talked about it being a good option for economic development at some potential point, even though it's costly now. Do you have any projections around the economic development opportunities, other alternatives that you presented? Like, I know I'm interested to know, despite it being costly in the initial implementation phase, what's the potential for growth for the city over time?
We have not attempted to project or put a dollar value on future potential economic development from that. Yeah.
Yes, I have a question about alternative 4, the flood levy.
Yes.
And so the map you showed shows a good portion of Canton that might be affected.
Right.
What's the process to that if you all are having to go in with that as an alternative for property owners, whether that's business or residential. So is it that you all would clear that entire space out and then it would be empty from then on, or would other development come in there after you have put the levee there and that one, yes?
Right, so the idea would be to this, as with any of these construction alternatives, part of the design process would be identifying properties that would need to be acquired, easements acquired in order to build the structure. And so that would be part of the design, like I said, the design process. We go through the Uniform Relocation Acquisition Act, follow the guidelines, and acquire whatever easements or property are necessary to build it. But as far as protecting these properties, they would be left alone. The idea is that they would no longer be at risk of flooding, and therefore annual flood damages would be reduced or eliminated. Flood insurance premiums would be reduced, if not eliminated. And then, hopefully, because of those reasons, we would expect that property values eventually could rise over time. And there may be, and that then, I mean, you would hope that there would be secondary, economic impact that could result from that as far as development or other things that can take place.
Thank you.
One more question. Are these slides available on the website or somewhere that we can see like the comparison when it comes to neighborhoods and things like that as we go back and talk to it more broadly with folks in our communities?
I'm going to ask the landlord.
Yes, it's on the website.
Okay.
Is it there? Is it already there?
It's already.
Okay. You said it's already on there?
Okay, and then I have one final question.
Okay.
First of all, thank y'all for this. This is long overdue for the city of Canton in terms of just a plan for our, to save people's homes, right? I have property in some of these areas that you're talking about. And so it's really important that we're having this conversation now. We're thinking about this in this way. It also, it causes me to ask the question around local talent and making sure as we're going through these processes and we're thinking about these designs, that we are also thinking about it from an employment standpoint for the people of Canton, for folks who are looking for jobs and other avenues of opportunity to be able to bid for some of this work as well.
And to your point, you owe that to the Board of Supervisors and their staff, City of Canton, their leadership. You owe that to NRCS, the state office, Mr. Lewis and his staff, and to the Mississippi Soil and Water Conservation Commission, Mr. Nick Ivey and Mr. Brad Shedd from that agency. That is, I've said this before about these kinds of projects. This project is I don't know of a better example of federal, state, and local partnership. You got a federal funding agency who's partnered with a state agency that can implement this. And they have partnered with a local sponsor, the local board supervisors in the community who are on the ground and who can coordinate it from the local sponsorship. So it really is a federal, state, and local partnership. And that's who you have to thank for this.
Bill, you did the combination of 1, 2, and 4 that you had up there.
Right.
And we heard benefits that it would help city of Canton. How would the bid all help the areas outside of the city of Canton? That combination was the end results. Would it help the areas outside as far as flood control?
The flood benefits would be realized in these critical areas in the city of Canton.
But the water actually comes from Watershed. No.
Water comes from, that's right.
Okay, but it wouldn't affect that area between Watershed and Canton at all.
Right.
Any of these.
There would be relatively no impacts
Okay.
to the upstream areas. Yes, sir.
In looking at these alternatives, I was trying to make sure that was understanding that, this one, we talk about removing the flood risk, but not the home.
That's a good point. That's a very good point. When that says it removes 225 homes from flood risk, better way to say that, it removes the risks, mitigates the risks to 225 homes. We're not removing those homes. Figuratively, we're taking them out of the floodplain, but we're not going anywhere. We're mitigating the risk to those.
We're removing the water.
Right, that's a very
Not
good
the
point.
house. Hopefully.
Please ask any other questions, but also please feel free to, if you want to spend any more time looking at these. What you see here is kind of summarized on that big map. We got all of them summarized on that one board, just to make it simple. Or maybe that's more confusing. I don't know. But please spend as much time as you need. Ask questions. But again, one more time, the most important thing you can do is give us your feedback on that form, so we can take that down and actually become part of the document itself.
I want to ask you a question as it relates to Baxter Creek and its backflow.
Yes.
Over by MLK, where the backflows because there's really no place for it to go. There's the absence of channel, so it doesn't cross King Range Road. I have an opportunity to get over to the Big Flag. So where in this presentation, besides the combination, the levees, does it mitigate and hopefully maybe eradicate that flooding and that being at MLK, Baxter Creek?
That's what this flood wall does. Here you're talking. There's the bend right there. There's right there. There's MLK running right there. And there's the bridge.
Okay.
If you recall that iconic drone photo from 2022, probably the bridge deck's the only thing sticking out of the flood wall.
All right.
Both sides are under the water. This flood wall would prevent that flooding in that area. So that area is here, and then Isabel over here on the other side. But the idea behind this is to protect all of this at-risk area and that at-risk area. And these walls will be extended on out into the floodplain, not as far as King Ranch, but out in that direction.
Okay.
But that's the whole point. That neighborhood is the whole point of that, is to protect that from flooding. Yes, yes.
That's the ward that I represent, I'm on here. And I know we talked a lot about Watershed Street and Martin Luther King, but there are several streets in my ward over there. Singleton Street, Isabella Street, Martin Luther King, Canal Street, Johnson Street. So what impact would the barrier or the footwall, the levee, what would that do for those?
Right. This is, you mentioned Isabel?
Isabella, Singleton,
Right. So this,
Johnson, and Payne.
so that, the intention behind this is to protect that, that's the area is over here. The intent is to protect that area, keep the flooding out of that area. If you think about this photo here, think about this flood, think about that Baxter Creek out there. This would be the wall, and over here is Isabella. On the other side, where the other wall is MLK. But the idea is to keep it between those walls from getting out into those neighborhoods. So this would address those areas you're talking about.
So the wall and the relationship, what this, all the one did is talking about. What mitigates the water that falls inside the walls? We just had a flood on Highway 16, maybe almost a year ago. We had a 100-year flood event just north of Canton in a high ground area. So the water that falls, I know through NRCS and other programs, they have these floodgates that open the water to release. But when you have water that high, what's going to, I know in Greenwood, at Fort Pemberton, they use pumps to pump water over the wall, or pump it through some type. But all the water that falls in Canton that can't get out because of the high wall there, it keeps water in. But what about the water that falls behind the wall when you get a significant rain?
That's a great question. And that's two ways you can do it, either with gates, and they work until the water gets so high outside that the gate shuts and you can't get moving. So the other thing is the pump. So more than likely, these solutions, particularly the flood levee on the south part of Kent, in that lower corner, more than likely to have a detention area and a pump because in a significant event, if it's falling everywhere, it will back up behind those structures.
Have we had a history of having water to get higher than 5 feet? Since this is showing a 5 feet flood walk we have?
Well, the intention would be to design that to the design flood with some freeboard. Generally, you have to consider at least a couple of feet, 2 to 3 feet of freeboard between that flood event and the top of the structure. So we would design that would be designed into the structure based on historic events. We went back and looked at, don't quote me on this, but we went back and looked at that 22 event, August 22 event. 22. And it approximated 100-year. We modeled a 100-year event, and then we looked at that. We actually took the weather radar data and imposed it on our model, and that event mimics the 100-year, the same impacts as a 100-year flood. So actually, that was, I have to tell you, that was quite a significant event. But we take those historical events, and then the design, considerations, and then add, and there are FEMA regulations that require certain freeboard design. So we take all that into consideration to come up with that height. Mr. Banks, anything else you want?
The question is, I want to make sure that everyone, we need to get the communities turned in at the game. So,
Yeah, if you want to take some and take them to friends and family, feel free to do that.
That'd be great. Yeah, let's get it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Doc, I appreciate your help.
Larry, anything else you want to, any comments you have for us? Any more comments, anything you'd like to say?
Oh, yeah, I have a lot of comments.
Yeah.
Shouldn't call my name. But look, this is a great project. There's so many people here that think, they say you always get in trouble when you start calling your name, but we certainly want to thank you, Carl, and Gerald over there, and Mike, of course, my long-term 100-year friend here, Andrew Jenkins, and others. This is a great program for Madison County. Remarkably worthwhile. It's been flooded here for 50 years now. The constituents have been screaming about flooding. Time evolves. It just simply took all of this time for the right minds to make the right contact with the right people that allow this to happen. And so this is good for the county, the state, and particularly for the city of Canton. And we're most appreciative to be the recipients of this wonderful task that you guys have done for the city of Canton. And this is Alderwoman Mon Yuki here of 6, and then we have my other alderman over here of 5. And soon now, I won't have to hear that cry about flooding in their area. I don't know if any of you have ever been in a flood, been in that wet, dangerous water, but fortunately, you've come to that point where hopefully that would be non-existent. And on behalf of the city of Canton, we wish to thank all of you who are involved in this great project for those of us who are in this city and this county. Thank you.
You know, it's going to help us to get as many of these in as we can, because we are planning on having this project tied down to turn into our partners, soil conservation, NRCS, and whatever other applicants you might have, as soon as possible. I'm hoping that it's going to be submitted by August 15th. And I think that on the 9th, we have a meeting to make a presentation in June of what we plan to submit, so we can get this thing going, because he showed us timeline with design and all that, and how the flood and all the time. So as soon as we can get plans to be in construction and not being in design, the better off we all will be. And I appreciate all of you all for coming. Thank you very much, and we're going to keep you informed.
Thank you.
Okay.